multitasker. Wonderful audience. And also to our panelists who are here today, Sarah, Alex, Ann, and Steve. I would invite you to each introduce yourselves briefly for the audience.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Karlgaard. I am the General Counsel and Corporate Secretary of Fujifilm Holdings Americas Corporation. We are headquartered in Valhalla, New York. We have responsibility for 26 independently run subsidiaries, a large portion of which are in healthcare, both in medical device, CDMO, and life sciences.
Good morning. So I'm Steve Fraley, General Counsel at Coloplast for the North America office. Coloplast is a Danish medical device company that's been around for many years. We don't have that many business units, but we have 4 or 5. Yes, exactly. I've been here 5 years, before that at Olympus and Medtronic, and before that a commercial litigator.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Ann Miller. I'm in-house at Medtronic, based here in Minneapolis. I've been with the company for 18 years, and I've done FDA regulatory practice for all of it, and lately kind of focusing on more quality systems, post-market issues. Started my career at the Chief Counsel's Office at FDA.
Excuse me, Alex Rosenstein. For the last couple of weeks, I am the General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer of NMDP, formerly known as Be the Match, National Marrow Donor Program in Minneapolis. I am a 2-time Frederickson alum, and I was also the General Counsel at Cardiovascular Systems, CSI, and I was Compliance Officer for part of the time I was there.
Great. Thank you all. I'm really excited. We got a wonderful panel here with a lot of experience. So I'm going to run through some questions. We had a lot of questions that we came up with, and we narrowed it down to 7, and we'll see how we do getting through those in the next 40 minutes or so. We may have some time for some audience questions as well. So I'm going to start with one question about collaboration. And feel free to share your thoughts. I think I'll start with you on this, Sarah. How does your legal department collaborate with other departments, such as regulatory affairs, quality affairs, and operations to ensure compliance? And in some companies, compliance and legal are also separated. So how do you get these people talking so that you can avoid trouble?
Yeah, in our organization, legal and compliance are separated. The Chief Compliance Officer is a peer of mine, both reporting to the CEO. We find that structure to be incredibly effective. We are very, very close. We are together, really strong partners. Where it gets a little bit trickier, as I mentioned, we have 26 independently run subsidiaries, is on the quality and regulatory side. Yeah. And we run a lot of variety in terms of industry segments. We are in addition to the healthcare segments that I mentioned, we're also in electronic materials, as well as what you know Fujifilm to be, which is the cameras, the imaging, the printing. Quality and regulatory expectations vary widely among those industry segments, right? And our company, coming up on 91 years of existence, started in the much less regulated space. So, talking with our executive leaders around quality and regulatory, we have really evolved from when, if the camera doesn't work, you don't get your pictures, to if the medical device doesn't work, the diagnosis isn't made. And so we're spending a lot of time sort of educating just across the organization what that looks like to be a medical device company, to be a life sciences company, particularly in the US.
Thank you. I also wanted to mention that the views of the speakers are their own. And so
Sure is.
They're speaking freely up here, not representing anyone but themselves. So I don't know, Steve and Alex, if you have anything to add to that, please do.
I mean, I can, I guess, chime in on the quality regulatory piece at Medtronic, at least, and it's where I sit. We are actually very closely tied to our quality and regulatory, especially our quality organization, our quality professionals. I think that has come, over the course of several years of just building those relationships. So they come to us on their own a lot for questions, legal questions, regulatory questions, also just what do you think of this question that are really not legal in nature, but just more kind of gut checks. I think that at least part of the work that I do is kind of bringing the core legal skills, which are critical thinking and writing, and also just investing the time with the clients over the years, sitting at the table, reading their technical documents, asking questions, and just learning their terminology so that when something does come up where they really need you, you can, kind of speak their language. But it doesn't happen overnight. It's relationship building and I guess trust building, and just learning to be collaborative partners with them.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah,
Alex.
I'll weigh in. I guess a blanket statement for everything I'm going to say. I'm going to be bringing a smaller company perspective, certainly much smaller than Medtronic. And also I'm finding a lot of what I'm going to talk about may actually echo some of the comments of the other panels. A lot of good advice that's actually the way I see things. So at a smaller company, it's actually pretty easy to collaborate with the other departments because you kind of know everybody. So I did easy things like I had standing meetings with, and do now also, standing meetings with the leaders in those parts of the organization. I viewed my role as kind of having eyes on everything in the organization and being able to connect dots. So having just standing meetings, even if we didn't have particular topics, helped us stay connected just on a weekly, very regular basis to be able to identify issues that were emerging. So that was just a great practical way to deal with it. The other thing I think it was David may have mentioned on the last panel is building trust and credibility and just having an open door policy so that people in other departments will come to you with issues and want to collaborate with you because they know you will address whatever the issues are. So I find that is extremely helpful.
Great.
I'll just add a little bit on collaboration is so critical in-house and navigating and staying connected. As I've talked with some of my colleagues here, sometimes it's just, can we find out what's going on and how do we do that? Because once we do, it'll change the next day. So how do you manage that? And part of that is through the relationship building. We actually, when we structured our job duties, we have people whose part of their job is to develop what I call business intimacy with the business unit. You need to know their strategies, their plans, and be the one to feed it back, even if you're not going to be the one supporting on a particular initiative or project, because it's too much unless you're an extremely small company, to try and manage yourself. In the quality organization, something we can bring, even though we're not deep regulatory lawyers, is that we can bring this idea of approaching things from a logical perspective, being a thought partner. So we, for example, will work with post-market surveillance. What's your template for the complaint response? When are you going to escalate something to legal because you heard lawyers are involved or something, or whether it was a serious injury? We look at the HHE, or whether it's a situation analysis. There's been so many times people in quality have written something that was not what they meant, and it could be taken a very different way. So part of it is advising on that kind of thing. One area of training that we've done in a couple of the companies I've been at is literally called Right Smart Training. Quality, in addition to sales and regulatory and marketing, are the teams we typically focus on that. There's a big disclaimer slide at the front, which is, this is not intended to tell you how to not write about bad conduct or how to write around bad conduct. It's basically to say we still have to do the right thing, but we just got to make sure we're accurate in saying what we mean to try and avoid these bad emails that we hear that can come back to haunt. We actually will have some real and some mock emails that we weave into those examples. And I think that's another way to help do some preventative lawyering. In terms of with the quality organization, I think the other key part we get involved with is a lot of the communications, especially if there is a field action. Besides being kind of that classic regulatory lawyer, it's how should we structure the letter to the customer? How should we draft the internal FAQ for the sales force? Because they'll be talking about it and being asked about it. So I think we can play that role in addition to being kind of a very deep expert.
Yeah, great feedback. And I think it's really important, as you've all outlined, to stay connected with these different departments, especially as quality issues have become popular theories for prosecution, especially with whistleblowers in the government, as off-label cases were lost. A big one because of this law firm right here with Howard Root's case and Vascular Solutions, and the government was not as excited, has not been as excited to bring those cases for off-label promotion, but so we're seeing a ramp up in some of these quality cases. So it's like the panel pointed out, really staying in touch with those quality folks and making sure you're available to them is important. Moving to the next question, and I'm not a panelist, but I had to add my 2 cents in there because I really enjoyed your comments. So number 2, and I'm going to pitch this one over to you, Steve. How do you handle situations where there's ambiguity in the regulations or guidance? And as we know, there's a lot of ambiguity out there. And I have a second part to this, and you can either just answer that question about the ambiguity, if you'd like to tie in how you determine how to move forward, that would be helpful.
Part of the hardest part of the job, right? When there's no clear answers or there's more ambiguity. And I approach it with what I call the big mental algorithm that I throw all the factors in, weigh them each differently on a case-by-case basis. How strong or credible are the 2 arguments? What is the risk? What is the type of risk? Is it a pure compliance risk? What are the business repercussions if I go down one avenue? If I take one avenue, am I putting something else at risk beyond the immediate issue? I try and put all that together. And I can't say there's some magic formula, but at the end of the day, you weigh all that out and then come up with a plan. I will tell you, these are the situations where I do consult deep industry expert outside counsel to say, here's what I'm looking at. On the one hand, I see this, on the other hand, I see that, and ask for their opinion. We all know you can go to lawyers who will say, well, this could happen or that could happen. No, I need to have somebody who can say, I ran into some similar situations with other clients, maybe not the exact issue, but some very similar analysis. Here's what they did. Here's what we saw was a problem with it, or here's why it turned out well. And what is the probable outcome, not what might happen. And I think if you find people like that, these kinds of situations are where you want that insight to see if they see something you're not seeing. And then, the hardest part of the job is use your judgment and come up with a recommendation.
Thank you.
There's a couple things I might add to that. One, very practically, I tend to be a little bit intentional about making sure that I at least have a level of consensus within my legal team, right? Either consulting the experts or beyond. But then I will often bring some trusted, smart business colleagues into the conversation, right? I don't think it serves you in the long run to pretend like you have the answers. I'm not suggesting you do this, but to pretend that you have the answers when the area is in fact gray. And I understand, leaders are different sort of in their preferences or expectations, but I found it to be most successful where you are working with smart partners on the business side where whether it's in quality or regulatory or whomever, your business clients, and you lay it out there and you have as much of that context and information. And I would also add, there are many firms that have former regulators, and this is an area where we will partner with our government affairs team as well, especially as the administrations are changing, to sort of get a sense for, okay, this is the landscape, this is what we understand the regulations are today. How do we think the current regulators are going to judge that? So we've been able to develop some relationships with folks who know the current regulators and at least can, as best as anyone can, try to crystal ball that and bring that into the conversation as well.
Yeah, and I think that's especially true for the FDA space because so much of what is required is not in the regulations. And I'm saying required, I would put my little air quotes up. Much of what FDA does, for instance, especially in inspections, right? So the factory inspections, the on-site inspections, what they'll look at, what they'll ask for, what they'll expect from you, you can't find in a regulation, and you probably can't even find it in guidance. You might find it in other warning letters in the industry. If you can, if you have the benefit of, I mean, I'm in a big company, so I have worked on several 43 responses. And so I sort of have that library in my head. But if you can, FOIA them or just understand what when FDA, has a design control requirement, what does that actually mean? So it does take some work. We have in-house counsel that, we're FDA experts, but if you don't have that, then going outside, the FDA bar is very, very, very steeped in this area because it can catch you. If you look at the regs and you say, I don't need to do this because it's not in the regs, you might get caught. And if there's something, I think sort of with the change at administration, and as we watch that, that's going to be kind of a question for me is FDA is clear that guidance is not required. We tend to follow it because we think it sort of gives us a guidance on what FDA expects. It's a good compliant place to be. It's the safe place to be. But what will be enforced, if you will, a year from now? What will all of those guidances that are maybe newer, will they be viewed the same way? So that'll be something that we watch. And I guess just for me, if it is ambiguous or if it is kind of a judgment call, I do the same. I bring in a business partner or a quality partner, because the last thing you want to do is recommend something that they can't implement. That's completely impractical. Our system can't do that. We work in IT systems. Our complaint handling system doesn't have that function. We'd have to do this update. You have to think about the practical implications and then sometimes work backwards from there.
Great comments. I'll add a little tidbit again. I once defended a client on a warning letter, and the FDA acknowledged they followed the guidance, but they said, we essentially expect more from you. And we were like, okay, that's tough. You're following the rules and still getting a warning letter somehow. So you just never know what the regulator is thinking. Number 3, another question here, toss. I'll send this over to you, Anne. What is the biggest compliance mistake you've seen, and what lessons did you learn from it?
I think I'm sure I've made steps over my years, but one thing that I was thinking about and kind of preparing for this is so occasionally FDA will come out with kind of a big new thing, a new guidance that seems to shift. Recently, they came out with what they call an early alert pilot program, where they're providing really quick notice of recalls that they think will be class 1, but they aren't classified yet. They come out within like 5 days. No basis in the statute, regulations, guidance, anything. It's just a pilot. And it felt really abrupt. However, if you look back over the past couple of years, you can sort of see them moving in this direction. And I think that's one thing that I'm continue to remind myself is FDA sort of gives you little signals along the way of where it wants to go. So pay attention. There's so much on the website that you have to be careful. I mean, it's kind of the Google thing, right? You can't always trust what's on the FDA website, but there is a lot of information out there. And oftentimes you can signal you can figure out what their next step is going to be, so it doesn't feel so abrupt. I don't know if that's really a compliance mistake per se, but it does help you not get caught flat-footed.
Excuse me. Mine would be that if you've got an employee who's a problem from a compliance perspective, it is not going to get better. You need to deal with it quickly, because it will fester and it will get worse and it will spread. As uncomfortable as it is to deal with an employee issue, you have to deal with it. So I think David had mentioned something about that in the last panel, but yeah, I've had experiences with that where I've regretted not taking action sooner.
Thank you. Anyone else like to share any?
Well, I'll just echo that one compliance mistake that I see happen a lot is just sort of freaking out. And I think that goes to the communications as well, just the panic sort of. I genuinely do believe that people are trying to do the right thing, and where things go awry is mostly out of ignorance or lack of understanding. However, when they do think that something has gone awry and then they panic and they put everything in email and they panic to, 18 of their closest colleagues, that's not great. That's not super helpful to the situation.
Yeah. No. Yeah. And to that end, I know several of you have mentioned writing right training. Amanda mentioned that as well. For the attorneys out there that are responsible for compliance, whether it's healthcare compliance, interactions with providers, it's privacy, it's regulatory compliance, having that training, which takes, I call it this don't write stupid emails training. It's a 15-minute training. It can be. And one of the slides we have is like the Chicken Little rule, which is what Sarah just commented on. And it's, don't panic. Don't send an email to the entire company. Pick up the phone, and the sky it's not falling. So I'm sure many of you do that, but I found that to be really successful.
Mark, can I interject on that
Please
point? It's important to do that kind of training. What scares me a little bit right now is the use of AI. People are recording meetings. They're using AI to create transcripts of meetings or summaries of meetings. So email training may be good for
Great point.
emails. People may not be thinking about, I better watch what I say in a meeting that's being recorded, because that creates a whole other set of evidence and record
Absolutely.
that could be really problematic. Even if what people are saying is not what the company ultimately does, it may look like there's a culture of wanting to do things that the company shouldn't be doing. So
Totally. And yeah, to your point, it's all documentation methods. So better title for it is good documentation practices, or you'll see it as GDX, because it includes text. Snapchat, they're saying whatever method you're using, well, the message disappears. Nothing disappears. It's somewhere on a server somewhere. And, there's ways the government can get their fingers on those things. So, yeah.
Those transcripts are terrible. I mean, they're inaccurate. I mean, so we use them a lot. So Fujifilm's headquartered in Tokyo. We use them a lot to attempt to do translations in real-time conversations. I mean, it's a joke. None of it are the right words.
So I'm going to toss this next one over to, I think, Alex, you are up. What are the biggest hurdles you face in maintaining culture of compliance within your organization? So this really hits that culture, which we also heard this morning in the presentations. And how do you overcome them? If you want to pull in any metrics you may use that you find valuable, feel free to do that. I also say this, like this was I kind of snuck this one in, but I'm sure we've all gone through a situation too where you're buying a company and then their culture is different than yours. And that presents a whole nother set of challenges. But Alex, if you can comment on compliance culture, yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a cliche and a repeat, but obviously tone at the top is what is true. As the general counsel, compliance officer, you can't be the only one talking about it at the company. If you're the only one, it is not going to resonate and become part of the culture. So it's also not only the CEO mentioning it at all company meetings. It has to be among an entire executive team, and it has to flow down to everybody. You have to talk about it not just in compliance training, but you have to talk about a culture of ethics and compliance sort of throughout the course of the company's operations, and be very visible about it. I reminded of a story that this was not any place I worked, but it was a story of somebody had told me at a place they worked where there was a device company where there was a marketing, I don't know what their position is, manager, VP, something, director, who the company got an FDA warning letter, and he held it up to his team saying, I welcome this. This shows we're doing what we need to do in marketing. We're being aggressive. It's like, if you've got that, you're going to have a huge uphill battle to deal with if you're in charge of legal or compliance at the company. So hope you don't have that kind of situation. But I think you really have to create really good relationships with your peers. And so that they are cascading the messaging throughout their organizations and making sure that people understand that there's no tolerance for behavior that's outside of the norms that we've established. I don't have any metrics, so somebody else at a bigger company may be able to weigh in on that. But I think it really is just being very, very consistent with the messaging throughout the organization and not just coming from one department.
I'll suggest one metric for culture is we look at how many reports come into the compliance hotline. But I think what's also interesting is to look at how many reports come in because people went to their upline manager versus the hotline. And what we like to see is more and more coming in from managers and fewer from the hotline. And I think that can give a signal as to your compliance culture. When I think about it from a quality management system, I'm sure we all get, there's the quarterly management, voluminous slide deck. And when you go through that, I think one thing I always do, is there anything in there I saw that should be in a CAPA that's not? And then I also ask myself, did the deadlines on the CAPA just keep getting pushed back? And is that just ongoing? And that, I think, then forms some discussions from kind of a quality compliance perspective.
Thank you. I will move to the next question and pull it back to you here, Sarah, if you don't mind. So number 5, what are some of the best practices for training employees on compliance matters? And how do you ensure the training is effective and retained?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is really hard, but honestly, my short answer is just as many methods as possible, right? Obviously, you will check all of the boxes. There will be written training. There will be anything through your learning management system, you will meet all of those expectations. But to the extent that you can actually have face-to-face conversations, live trainings, and to get into the business when it actually is applicable, I find to be incredibly helpful for, creating that culture of compliance. So when there's going to be trade shows, when there's going to be sales meetings, be in that and tailor the messaging to what matters. Likewise, if you're going to have a big product launch, or if something goes wrong, don't ever let a crisis go to waste. If something goes wrong, do not go too far after the case is resolved before you come back and you do a retrospective and you say, how could we have done that better? How could we have done that differently? What does can we marry it to our compliance efforts to say, oh, this is where we sort of fell short, or this is where we fell awry. One sort of concrete example that just came to mind. So I have 2 lawyers who sit in our Brazilian office, which, if you didn't know this, I didn't until I joined Fujifilm. Brazil has a more aggressive litigation and regulatory structure than even the US. I always thought the US was the worst. Turns out I was wrong. And they hold an annual all-day compliance event known as Fair Play. And they theme it in the entire organization. I think they have 180 employees down there. Takes the day, and it's driven by games. It has a different theme every year, the Olympics, but there's trivia, there's physical games that are all rooted in compliance. And I think if you can get in an organization that is willing to support an effort like that, I mean, they love it. It is a joyous day. I think every type of methodology is where this really comes in.
And I'll just add to that, there's obviously the formal training we do. Lawyers do it often in-house. Don't be afraid of the informal training and seize those opportunities. Sending out notifications or notices to your clients about a recent warning letter, key takeaways. I do that often. Hold office hours so they can come to you with questions on, recall determinations. Constantly building that, regular cadence of you can come to us and ask the specific questions. It may not be training per se, but every time you're talking about those issues, you're training on it. Sitting in on the quality leadership team meetings and presenting there, just finding these pockets of places where you can interact with your clients, and just, even if it's just one thing, it tends to, in my experience, generate some really rich discussion. And I feel like the takeaways are more concrete and real in real time than often the kind of the formal presentations.
Yeah, and I agree. We have to do all of the required annual trainings and things like that. One thing I've noticed, I'm certainly no expert in adult learning, but lawyers, compliance people, quality people like to have kind of kitchen sink trainings with, now the one-day thing the all-day thing with the trivia thing sounds good, but doing, having a 2-hour module that every employee has to complete that covers the whole range of topics, I don't think that's that effective. I think it's more effective to do smaller, targeted trainings on particular topics. Kind of ties into what you were saying, but and you can find online modules that work pretty well for that purpose, where you're just talking about, once a quarter, a couple times a quarter, you have a 15-minute module to look at instead of trying to take in everything that falls under, a compliance program. I think that works. Personally, it works way better for me. I think the cybersecurity people do this really well. Instead of doing it all in one big chunk, it's just very consistent. Every quarter, you're going to have a couple of these. And I think it works. It just resonates and works much better.
Yeah.
We've also had some good success with publicizing near misses, whether they're ours or just in the industry, right? And I find that people pay attention to a short email that is directed to them than something buried or blasted or, and so we've had some success in sort of just in an ad hoc way saying a phishing attack was leveled against our CFO. He followed our steps and we were not, victim to that. And I find that, you use people's names, you talk, specifically about the situation and it's like, oh, well, that's interesting. It's interesting to know that the CFO almost got spoofed.
Yeah. Makes it more real, right?
I'll just build on some of these themes. I think, Alex, you make a really good point about timeliness. This last year, we just finished our annual code of conduct training was 75 minutes, and it's now been boiled down to somewhere between 15 and 20, depending upon how fast you read. But the other thing is if you're in one of these large companies where you have all this electronic training, is really work with your HR and functional leaders, because some people are getting way more training than they really need. Are people getting the kinds of trainings on the topics they need? Now, you want to err on the side of overtraining, but you don't want assignments that just don't make a lot of sense. Another tactic that I think is real helpful for the live training is when we're in front of the sales team, we actually have the sales leadership participating in the little skits, the little role play exercises up in front of their teams, actively talking about why this is important. It sometimes takes a little cajoling to make that happen, but it pays off in the end. So I think that active, it's my leader, I better listen, right? So that obviously can be very effective.
Some great comments. And I know Amanda and I combined have probably performed, I don't know, hundreds, if not close to 1,000 trainings. So for what it's worth, I'll jump in here once again. I think the online training can be really successful and necessary to examine people and then to teach them and then see if they pass the quiz, right? Because they actually start to take it a little more seriously. I think in-person training, though, if you can get in at your NSM, your national sales meeting, and get up there, even if it's for 15 minutes and just be like, here's what's hot. We're seeing speaker programs that's an issue right now with the government. So we need to be really tight on that. And then have a forum in that same NSM where they can ask questions. I know, if you're familiar with Car Talk and they had Stump the Chump where they would just let people call in, I'd be like, ask me any question you want. And, that can be fun for them because they can actually, get a beef out like, hey, do I have to do this with sunshine reporting? Or, they might have a question there and the whole audience can hear it. I think, Steve, your point to making stuff entertaining, if you could somehow pull that off, that can really be exciting. And exciting as compliance can be, right? But if you kind of pull in current events, I know both Kardashians have been the targets of warning letters from the FDA, and they're not all that old. So if you could kind of pull some of that in, people are like, oh, Kim and Khloe got warning letters? Why? And just find forums to engage them. And if you do, like you said, don't let a crisis go to waste. If you see some sort of abuse, like with expense reports or something going on, it's a great time to remind the field, you need to follow these rules and, use that to your advantage. You probably, if it's a issue that's minor, you probably don't have to fire someone, but it's a good way to remind the field and obviously like no death by PowerPoint. People just kind of tune out, right? So we've got a couple questions left in about 9 minutes. So I'll just toss this up for anyone in the panel. I was up here looking, if you're wondering, I wasn't on Snapchat. I was actually confirming that I heard some news from Charlie from our office that RFK Jr. is confirmed. So we now have a new HHS secretary. And I expect the FDA commissioner to be on the heels. So of
So
that.
everything's perfectly clear now.
Well, we'll see. We'll see where that goes, but or completely unclear. We'll see. But I have this next question. Looking ahead to 2025, we're in 2025 now. What emerging compliance challenges do you anticipate, particularly in areas like data privacy, cybersecurity, AI, in healthcare? I would say even just to broaden that question out, now that we have a new secretary and we're seeing all this disruption in the rest of the government, I wonder if HHS will see similar disruption, or FDA. If anyone wants to take that one, please.
Well, the challenge is kind of what we joked about, is no idea what's going to happen, what the enforcement situation is going to be, how many people will be working there. I mean, there are so many issues right now that create unpredictability that it's really difficult to navigate and deal with. So I think, Sarah, you said, like, you got to stay calm and not freak out about what's going on. I would say if you're a government contractor or get government money from grants, there's going to be attention paid to you if there are enough people on staff in the appropriate agencies to actually look at you. So I'm terrible about predicting the future. My only prediction is that there's no way to know what's going to happen here, and you'd have to just be really flexible and adjust.
And I've asked myself this too, if there's right now, I don't know. But, as time goes on, as the dust settles and we kind of figure out what the environment is, at least, where my world is an FDA enforcement, not the, like what we were talking about earlier, but inspections and just sort of the run of the mill, the bread and butter enforcement. And that's a big question to me. Will they be inspecting? Will they be, expecting recalls like they have been? Where is that going to be? And I'm asking myself, how do I advise my client? Do I advise my client knowing this is where we've been? And even if maybe the compliance environment is different, does that change the advice? I mean, it can be a conundrum for in-house counsel. I guess where I'm landing right now is no change. We are where we are, not just because FDA thinks we need to do it that way, because we think it's, good for the patient, the appropriate thing to do. And we're a global company. So we have NVISA, we have TGA, we have BfArM, we have HPRA, and I can go on and on and on with the alphabet soup, but the global regulators right now are very active. So, if the regulation is sort of keeping you, where you need to be, that's where I'm also looking as well, even if FDA is just really unclear right now.
Yeah. Anyone else want to jump on that? Or are you good?
Well, I mean, I think it goes in both directions, right? The uncertainty goes in both directions. It might be that there might be additional scrutiny. It's far more likely that there's less. But then what do you do with that, right? I mean, we have a ton of environmental compliance issues throughout our organization too. And we're sort of going, okay, well, if they roll it back, that might be good for us. But is that good for us? And, or do we want to make any changes in reaction to that? I think, sort of weathering that turbulence is something that I'm talking with my team at great length about. It reminds me, it harkens back to, I was a HIPAA lawyer early on in my career, early when HIPAA existed. And you talk to the folks who colleagues that I worked with when HIPAA had no real teeth and no real enforcement. And at that time, they still protected the heck out of the data, right? It's very interesting to sort of kind of gauge how much the regulations should or do drive these things, or if it is in fact just the right thing to do and consistent with values, but also good business practice and, going to drive to that bottom line as well. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I was interviewed around the holiday by Tom Curran at All Things Considered on that question. How will this new administration impact the FDA? I'm sticking with my bet, which is I don't think it'll be largely impacted. At least like mass firings, the question was, will it be gutted? I don't think it will be gutted. I think it's very difficult to gut any group of the government, but now we're seeing different departments or at least agencies being closed. But the FDA, I think we'd all agree, I represent a lot of manufacturers, also providers. You need a strong regulator in this space. So I think the industry demands it. And so we'll see what happens. I think we should expect some changes. Moving to the last question, I think we're at just about at time. So maybe just a quick answer on this one. What advice would you give, if you have limited resources, what advice would you give smaller companies that are working on a pretty tight budget with how are they build out a compliance program?
I can take that one. I think we're a little smaller than, or my past experience. So it's hard for lawyers and compliance people to do this, but you have to be comfortable not dealing with every single little thing that comes up. You really have to assess what are our highest risk areas, what are the most likely to occur, and really focus most of your attention on those. And there's going to be you have to get comfortable saying good enough on the other stuff, because you don't, particularly if you're a team of one, which I've been in the past, or a team of two, you don't have the bandwidth to deal with it. And you're also in an organization, most likely, that doesn't have bandwidth in the other parts of the organization that you might need to tap into. So, if you're doing an investigation and you need help from IT in terms of doing searches and things like that, there's nobody whose job it is to deal with that. So you've got to find and have good relationships with the people in the company who you need to leverage to do the kinds of things you need to do. So it's difficult and it's uncomfortable. The other thing I would say is often you draw on outside counsel because you don't have the internal resources, but outside counsel doesn't always know how your company operates. So you have to help them along a little bit in terms of understanding the constraints you're working under, because the default of an outside lawyer is often, here's the gold-plated perfect way to do this. And you may say, I don't know, I can't do that. I don't have the time to do that or the resources to do that. So you have to help them understand what is scoped appropriately for your company and your company's, your resources. And at the same time, trying to do things quickly to not make them become bigger problems. So it's tough. It's really tough. But I think doing kind of a risk assessment at the start helps you visualize where really the areas are you need to focus on.
Great. Well, thank you. I think we're at 11:29 Central Time, so I think we'll end it there. Thank you very much to our panel. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you.